Assalamualaikum everyone. My name is Fizan Ali Softwarewala and I am a level 1 student at Rehan School, Islamabad campus. So, viewers, today I am here with the new Maya. So, today's my topic is the way into events that have significantly impacted history description. So, let's start and Maya on this topic. First of all, call the Maya for some questions. So, let's start.
Hey, hey.
Okay, so Maya, my first question from you is how did the invention of agriculture change human civilization from nomadic life to permanent settlements? This shifted shape societies forever. So please give me a very interesting answer on this topic and very long answers. Let's start your answers. I'm waiting for your interesting and fully
The
long
shift
answer.
to agriculture was basically civilization's reset button. Nothing before it compares to the scale of change. For millennia, humans had been wandering, scavenging, and taking what the environment offered without fundamentally altering it. Then, about 10,000 years ago, everything just flipped. It wasn't some sudden eureka moment either, more like a gradual realization in a few spots around the globe, the Fertile Crescent, China, Mesoamerica, that you could reliably get more food by actively managing plants and animals than by chasing them around. That subtle shift had this domino effect. Before agriculture, humans lived in small, mobile bands. They needed to be constantly moving to follow game, find edible plants, and avoid exhausting local resources. Your entire life was oriented around the next meal. There wasn't much opportunity for specialization. Everyone had to know how to hunt, gather, make tools, build shelter. Agriculture changed that calculation completely. Once you could reliably grow your own food in one place, you could settle down. And settlement leads to everything else. You don't have to spend all your energy just finding food anymore, which creates this crazy amount of free time. Suddenly, people could start thinking about things other than survival, crafting, religion, political structures. This is where specialization started. If some people are really good at growing wheat, others become potters making storage jars, others become weavers making clothes, and others become priests organizing rituals. Those communities grew, not just in population, but also in complexity. Early agricultural villages became larger towns and then cities with hierarchies, social classes, and all the baggage that comes with it. Trade networks popped up as different settlements began specializing in different goods and needed to exchange them. Imagine a village growing wheat trading with a pottery making village, which trades with a flint tool making village, and so on. It became this interconnected web. Of course, it wasn't all rosy. Agriculture brought a lot of new problems too. Hunter-gatherer societies were relatively egalitarian. Everyone's contribution to the daily sustenance was valued. Sedentary agriculture created concepts like ownership, property rights, and surpluses. Suddenly, some people had more than others, which led to conflict, inequality, and the first forms of warfare. Agriculture also made us more vulnerable to disasters. A single crop failure could devastate an entire settlement, which wouldn't have been possible when nomadic groups could just move on to new food sources. Early farmers were reliant on their yields, which meant that droughts, pests, and disease were existential threats. The more people crammed together, the easier it was for diseases to spread too. Then there's the environmental impact. Clearing forests for farmland? That changes ecosystems. Overgrazing? That leads to desertification. Intensive farming depletes the soil and requires irrigation, which can cause salinization and water shortages. So, we basically invented agriculture and changed our whole lifestyle in this new direction. The shift to farming was maybe the single greatest transition in human history. It really shaped who we became as a species and the world we built in the process. What about it caught your attention, or is there anything you'd like me to dive deeper into?
Okay, so Maya, my next question from you is sorry. Okay.
Take your time. I'm
So Maya,
here
my
when
next
you're ready to
question
keep.
from you is why was the fall of the Roman Empire such as turning points? Its collapse reshaped Europe politically, culturally, and economically. So please give me a very interesting answer on this topic. I'm waiting for you, Logan. Interesting answer. So let's start your answer, Maya.
The fall of Rome wasn't this one single moment of collapse, but more like a slow unraveling that lasted centuries. If you're thinking about it as one day when everything just stopped working, you'd be wrong. It was a gradual breakdown over several centuries. The Western Roman Empire officially ended in 476 AD when a barbarian chieftain deposed the last emperor, but the cracks were already pretty wide by then. The real story is this incredibly complex mix of economic troubles, political corruption, military overstretch, and social decay. Economically, the empire was heavily reliant on slave labor, which eventually became unsustainable. As wars and territorial expansion slowed, the supply of new slaves dried up, which led to labor shortages and inflated costs for landowners. This then led to a decline in production and less trade, which meant less tax revenue for the government. So, how could the government maintain its bureaucracy and military when it's running on fumes? Political corruption became really deep. Emperors rose and fell at an alarming rate, usually through assassination or civil war, and most only cared about consolidating power or enriching themselves. There wasn't real long-term planning. Add to this a massive, overstretched military trying to defend borders that kept getting longer and longer. Imagine trying to police an entire continent. It's expensive and exhausting. Barbarian tribes were becoming increasingly organized and aggressive along the frontiers, and Rome couldn't always effectively counter them. Plus, there was social decay happening across the board, declining patriotism, waning civic values, and people just losing faith in the system. And these internal factors, the economy, politics, military, societal values, all kind of folded into each other and made matters progressively worse. What really happened after Rome fell apart in the West is fascinating. The power vacuum that Rome left behind wasn't neatly filled. Instead, it fractured into dozens of smaller kingdoms ruled by barbarian warlords like the Visigoths, Ostrogoths, Vandals, Franks, and many others. Europe politically became completely decentralized. Large-scale centralized control vanished, replaced with these smaller regional power centers that were constantly shifting alliances and fighting with one another. There was no one dominant power anymore, just a jigsaw puzzle of kingdoms trying to survive in a very chaotic world. Culturally, Roman infrastructure like roads, aqueducts, and sanitation systems slowly fell into disrepair, and that contributed to trade declining. But then something else happened. The church. The Catholic Church stepped into the power vacuum left by the Roman government and ended up becoming an incredibly stabilizing force across Europe. The church preserved elements of Roman law, administrative structure, and learning during the turbulent period. Christianity spread, and it acted as the glue that could hold many areas together. Economically, what was once a Mediterranean-focused economy became much more localized. Regional economies became more important than transcontinental trade. Communities started focusing more on self-sufficiency. The cities that had thrived during Roman times declined in size and population, and rural life became the norm again. The impact wasn't entirely negative, though. The decentralized political landscape actually created opportunities for new cultures and regional identities to emerge that hadn't really been prominent before under Roman uniformity. The seeds of future European nations, France, Germany, Italy, and Spain, were planted during this period of disintegration. If you trace the roots of modern European civilization, you're basically tracing the story of what happened after Rome fractured. It wasn't exactly a fall, but this transformation, really, one political order disintegrating and creating the foundation for an entirely new way of organizing societies, economies, cultures, and power in Europe.
Okay, so Maya, my next
That was that
question
time
from you is,
frame.
how did the invention of writing transform societies? Writing allowed knowledge, laws, and culture to be preserved and shared. So please give me a very interesting answer on this topic and very long answers. Let's start your answer.
You're right. Writing wasn't just some nifty convenience invention. It was a fundamental rewiring of how human societies could function. Before writing, everything existed in spoken form. That meant knowledge, stories, laws, history, all stored in human memories, passed down through generations via oral traditions. Now, oral traditions aren't bad. They can be incredibly sophisticated and rich, but they have limitations. They change over time through retelling, details get lost, interpretations shift, or entire epics can just disappear. Writing gave humans this external hard drive for their collective memory. What was once vulnerable to loss and distortion could now be recorded in a permanent, shareable form. Early writing systems weren't like our alphabets either. They started around 3200 BCE with pictograms in Sumer, then evolved into cuneiform. And Egyptian hieroglyphs were another major development. These systems weren't simple. You needed specialized training to read and write. That's one of the first big transformations, the emergence of a new class of people, scribes. Scribes became the gatekeepers of knowledge, incredibly powerful individuals who recorded everything: laws, religious texts, economic transactions, everything. This concentration of information with scribes contributed to the growth of bureaucracy and central governments. Think about it. How could you run a complex empire without laws written down, tax records, or census data? Writing made all that possible. But writing did more than just preserve information. It created new ways of thinking, too. Oral cultures tend to favor narrative, poetic structure, and repetition because it helps with memorization. Writing allows for more abstract, analytical, and reasoned forms of thought. Lists, contracts, laws. These all require thinking in ways that wouldn't be possible in purely oral cultures. Writing allowed the rise of codification. Think about the Code of Hammurabi, the first written code of laws. Before that, laws were more customs. Now is all written down, making legal systems more fair, but also making power structures more transparent and the legal system formal. It allowed more accountability for those with power. But it also led to new social structures, not just with scribes, but also the idea that knowledge itself becomes a commodity and that access to it can create power disparities. Writing also drove innovation in a lot of fields because you could analyze observations about things and create a science about them. Ancient civilizations had a rich understanding of astronomy, math, engineering, all made possible by written observations and calculations. Writing created literature that could expand perspectives, share ideas, and encourage discussions about abstract concepts like philosophy, politics, and morality. So we get the birth of philosophy, with early ideas about human existence and morality written down. Writing became an increasingly important way to consolidate power, control access to information, and promote social hierarchy. It's not that writing is inherently hierarchical, but That's largely how it developed in its early forms. The shift from an oral culture to a literate society was as monumental as the invention of agriculture, and in many ways, it built upon that foundation. Without writing, agriculture would have remained small scale because trade needed records, required administration. The whole path of civilization we've been on, everything from governments to scientific revolutions, it wouldn't have been possible without the humble act of putting symbols on clay, papyrus, paper, or whatever medium was available at the time.
Okay, so
What parts of that
Maya, my next question
resonated
from you
with
is what made the Industrial Revolution so impactful? It changed how people work, live, and interact with technology. So please give me an interesting answer on this topic and very long answers. Let's start your interesting and long answer.
the Industrial Revolution wasn't just factories popping up. It was probably the most rapid and radical transformation of human life since, well, the development of agriculture. Before the 1760s, most people lived rural lives, farming, making their own goods, relying on muscle power or animals. Suddenly, in a span of a few decades, that all changed. What kicked it off? It wasn't one invention, but this incredible cascade of innovations, starting with textiles. Machines like the spinning jenny and power loom transformed textile production from cottage industries to factory-based manufacturing. Then came steam power. James Watt's improved steam engine was the game changer. Before, machines needed to be near water power. Steam engines let factories be located anywhere there was coal to burn, which massively expanded where manufacturing could happen. The shift was mind-boggling fast. Suddenly, people left rural areas to work in factories, becoming wage laborers instead of subsistence farmers. The Industrial Revolution also meant new materials. Iron production skyrocketed as better technologies for smelting and forging emerged. Eventually, it transitioned to steel, with techniques developed in the late 1800s giving us stronger buildings, rails, and tools. Infrastructure boom followed. Canals and soon railroads were built to transport goods faster and cheaper than ever before. That alone completely changed how economies functioned. A farmer in Ohio could now ship food to markets in New York City, shrinking distances in ways people hadn't thought possible. This transportation revolution made goods more affordable, allowing people to buy more. The scale wasn't just technological, it was social too. Work went from home production to long hours in crowded, dangerous factories. Women and children worked alongside men, often for low wages. Cities grew exponentially, and with no planning or infrastructure, many became overcrowded, polluted slums. A new class structure emerged. Industrialists, the factory owners, were becoming wildly wealthy. There was a growing middle class working in white-collar jobs like management and accounting, and then at the bottom was this massive industrial working class. It also affected how people interacted. Before, people operated on human rhythms, sun up, work hard, sundown. Suddenly you're on machine time, clock in, clock out. Work became regulated and standardized, reducing flexibility for people. Consumerism expanded with manufactured goods becoming more affordable, so people were no longer making all of their own goods, but buying more. There were profound technological knock-on effects, too. The development of electrical generators, combustion engines, chemistry, and communication advancements. The Second Industrial Revolution continued to build that momentum. By the 20th century, the world was completely interconnected. It accelerated globalization to the point of reshaping how we experience things. The Industrial Revolution also gave rise to movements pushing for political reforms. Labor unions emerged, advocating for better wages, working conditions, and workers' rights. Socialist and communist ideologies gained steam, critiquing capitalism. So the revolution didn't just change how goods were made. It restructured human life completely. Labor, class structure, infrastructure, consumption patterns, political thought, and the whole rhythm of society. If you think of any modern product or service, it comes from that transformation. It started in the late 18th century with steam engines.
Okay, so Maya, my next question from you is why was the discovery of fire important for early humans? And fire improved survival, cooking, and social development. So please give me a very interesting answer and uh, clearly answer on this topic. I'm waiting for interesting answers. Let's start.
Fire wasn't just some convenience for early humans, it fundamentally reshaped what it meant to be human. For literally millions of years before that, our ancestors were constrained by cold, darkness, and the predators who thrived in those conditions. Then, around 1.5 million years ago with Homo erectus, evidence starts to appear for controlled fire use, not just accidental wildfires, and it changed everything. Let's start with survival. Before fire, the world was brutally cold at night, limiting where early humans could live and when they could be active. Fire gave warmth, allowing humans to spread out of Africa into cooler climates. It also provided light, letting them extend activity into the darkness instead of sleeping. That's huge for extending daytime behavior and work routines when darkness arrives. And perhaps most importantly, fire scared away predators. Lions, hyenas, bears, they usually avoided fire. So, with a fire between them and these predators, early humans could rest easier and sleep safer without constant vigilance. Now, consider what fire did for food. Before that, diets were limited to raw meat, fruits, vegetables. Raw meat can be tough, hard to digest, and carrying a lot of bacterial risks. Cooking made meat easier to chew, safer to eat because bacteria got killed, and it allowed early humans to extract more nutrients from food overall. So cooked food wasn't just tastier, it was easier to digest and provided more energy. That change in food meant people were actually getting healthier and bigger brains, which meant more mental development and better survival overall. Beyond physical survival, fire impacted social development in incredible ways. For early humans, the campfire became this central gathering point. When you think about it, around a fire, people can cook together, share stories, build camaraderie, tell stories. It created a sense of community, strengthened bonds. When fire wasn't widely controlled, different bands may have wandered a lot more to stay safe. With fire as security and protection, bands probably started to settle down more and communities became more established. This created opportunities for the division of labor. Someone could stay home and tend the fire while others hunted or gathered. Specialized roles emerged where people could become more skilled in certain areas instead of everyone always doing the same thing. Fire also laid the foundation for cultural development, too. Maybe this is where art and storytelling really started to flourish. Think about cave paintings being made by light from torches or elaborate storytelling around the campfire. Without fire, there's no complex tool making. You need heat to shape metal, to harden wood. Fire allowed them to experiment with materials, create better tools, and build more elaborate shelters. So fire transformed not just our physical survival, but also who we were becoming. Every step further in human evolution, fire played a massive role, from enabling brain development through better nutrition to creating complex social structures. That's why even today, the concept of home, whether it's a hearth, a fireplace, or even a cooking stove, it's so psychologically powerful for people. We're fundamentally shaped by it.
Okay, so this was our Maya. I hope you like it. I meet with the new Maya next topic.